Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits, and the implications of that I'll leave to your imagination. Well, last week I was talking to Andrew Crowther, Suzanne Lubenko and Jerry Pennell about the role of W.S. Gilbert in creating, inventing, or at least pioneering the modern idea of stage direction as we understand it today. It's something we all owe a great debt to Gilbert for, and yet most people don't really associate him as being one of the fathers of that profession. Up to that point, theatre, which was really in the doldrums in the mid-Victorian period, was put on by impresarios or theatrical producers who were often actors themselves. They were looking for vehicles that would show themselves off. And so the idea that someone else would come in and tell them, who'd been putting up the money for a starring vehicle for themselves, how to do a show on stage to the best effect, was something almost incomprehensible to most people, and an affront to many actors. What would a non-actor know about putting on a stage show? That was the idea, and it's understandable. And yet you and I know, of course, that you do need someone to rein in some of the performances, create a cohesive whole, and make sure the show is serving the narrative rather than the actors and their performances. It seems absolutely self-evident now, but it wasn't 150 years ago. And the fact that control of the stage was wrestled out of the hands of the actors into the hands of the new craft of directors is greatly down to W.S. Gilbert, who almost single-handedly revolutionised the Victorian stage and made it respectable again, allowing the theatre to become full of the great playwrights later in the Victorian era, like Oscar Wilde and George Bernard Shaw, and then into the flowering of the theatrical 20th century, which we're still feeling the benefits of. And so, with the new Mike Leigh production of The Pirates of Penzance having opened at the English National Opera, and with the anniversary of Gilbert's death at the end of May looming, it's an entirely appropriate time to listen to the second half of that conversation with Jerry Pennell, Suzanne Lubenko and Andrew Crowther, the author of the new biography of Gilbert, Gilbert of Gilbert and Sullivan. So I hope you enjoyed this second part. And we start as we investigate Gilbert's interest in myth and fairydom, which marks him out absolutely as a Victorian with Victorian interests. Musical Talk. We were just talking about his craft. People liked his craft, even if they didn't necessarily like the message.
Yes, and he was also writing these. We have to talk about these fairy comedies.
It's a genre in its own right, isn't it?
Which
revived genre,
essentially
really.
created.
Oh, right.
It kind of derives at 10 times removed from the extravaganzas of James Robinson Planchet about 50 years before. But essentially, this was something that Gilbert created. Fantasy world, fantasy plays with magical elements written in blank verse, which almost have a kind of mythical element, I think. He takes the Pygmalion myth and creates it anew. He takes the idea of a magical palace where everyone has to speak the truth, derived from a French 18th century court, and he makes it his own. And
takes these are not adaptations, these are ideas which he then weaves into something bigger and better.
In the same way that Shakespeare did.
Yes, of course. Yes,
with an awful lot of his plots.
And these plays not only get good reviews and they're respected, but they also get long runs. So they get the audience as well. So
I think there's also the fact that he's regarded as being an interesting writer. I think all his plays are probably events, and at the risk of he was kind of the angry young man of his time, or at least perhaps angry young man is not quite the right phrase, but he was an interesting up and coming person, and so people would want to know what he was going to do next. It might not always succeed, but if it didn't succeed, the critics would say, well, it didn't succeed because of this, but they'd say, but it was jolly clever. And,
if we only learn.
If we would only learn, yes. Yes. But it wasn't worthless, if you know what I mean. The difference between something which fails because it's just trash and something that fails because he's being overambitious or whatever, you know, and so I think he had that reputation then as being perhaps the most interesting young playwright in London. Would that be sort of fair, that he was fairly universally recognised in that way?
So we're getting this reputation developing. He's regularly produced. He seems to be dabbling in lots of different genres. I mean, you know, musical theatre these days is seen as a genre, even though it is very broad in what it tackles.
Yes.
But so looking at it from that point of view, he's doing musical theatre, he's doing comedy, he has done burlesque, but he's put that behind him. He's done pantomime and he's put that behind him. He's doing social commentary. He's invented this genre of fairy plays. You know, he seems to be pushing in various directions with different success, but built himself this marvellous reputation.
Yes.
How far has he got with his drive then to take control? We're in the 1870s at this stage, which is we're about to come into the world of the Savoy operas, which is, if you like, when it's writ large. When I think a point was made actually yesterday that a structure was built around his skills. But this is that final step to there.
Yes.
What are his big successes in the 1870s? We've got the fairy plays. We've got The Wicked World and The Happy Land, which are controversial.
Yes.
And still remembered. You're a great fan of The Happy Land.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Do you want me to talk about that?
Please. I think so. One being a parody of the other.
Absolutely, yes.
Of his own work.
Yes.
I think that's marvellous.
Yes.
Yes.
I think this has been good. Let's do it again.
Well, to recognise, yes, I've done a good work, which is being really popular. But actually, you know, there's a lot in it. Well, and also there's a lot in it which you could easily parody. So I'll do it first before anyone else does, almost. Because I think I can do a better parody of my own work than anyone else can.
Yes. I can sort of almost see him, during the rehearsals for The Wicked World, thinking to himself, "Hang on, I could use this." I probably need to say something about the plot of The Wicked World.
Yes.
It's set in fairyland, which, for the purposes of the play, floats on a cloud above the world, and the fairies are very ethereal, and they love each other in a very ethereal, pure way, and they're very curious about the mortals below them on the Wicked World, and particularly about mortal love, which they regard as a blessing or a curse, and they know nothing about it. And one of them has a bright idea of bringing up 3 mortal men to fairyland, and they do this, and the consequences are disastrous. They bring mortal love with them, which creates jealousy and spite and all
discord.
Discord, yes.
And it's quite serious in that respect. You know, it's not an out and out comedy as the setting might sort of imply.
It's a kind of philosophical debate about the nature of love and
an observation.
Actually, were there not criticisms of the sexual anguish that the fairy queen went through, and this was again felt to be rather immoral, near the knuckle indeed.
Absolutely,
yes.
there was a review in which a scene in which the fairy queen tends to the wounds of one of the men for 6 hours in her bower, and the critic felt that this was very coarse and had certain implications which perhaps Gilbert didn't intend. You know, and
this is the dirty mind being brought to the feast, isn't it? Rather than actually being there already.
And he said, this critic said that one line in the play was unfit to be spoken in a theatre at all. And you look at this line and you think, what? So Gilbert took the paper to court, and I believe it was more or less a no-score draw at that one. But
this was a huge success. I mean, it became the talk of the town.
It was the talk of the town. It wasn't as successful as his previous fairy comedies, but yes, it was the talk of the town. And Gilbert decides he has this bright idea of parodying, using the framework of the play as a parody and a satire. Instead of these 3 mortal men bringing up mortal love to fairyland, they're going to bring the idea of liberal government.
who were
And-
presumably in place.
Yeah,
They were
was
by the
1860
skin of their teeth.
1868 was Gladstone's victory, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and 1873, he's in trouble. But and so these three mortal men are Gladstone and two of his colleagues called Robert Lowe and another man called Ayrton. Acton Smee Ayrton, if memory serves me correctly.
But two senior members of the government.
Yes, and Ayrton in particular was a figure of fun because he was in charge of a government department relating to culture, and he was notoriously uncultured.
That would never happen today.
No, quite.
By Jove.
So, and he co-writes this parody in tandem with an old friend of his called Gilbert Beckett, who worked on Punch. But the manuscript evidence suggests that Gilbert was the major writer of it. But he
So it's Gilbert Beckett and Gilbert Betting.
yes, very true.
I enjoyed that.
Yes,
I can
I'm
tell.
glad someone did.
That was an excruciating pun, as advertised earlier.
Yes,
Sorry, do carry on, please.
I'm not sure anyone can.
Gilbert, being a cautious fellow, decided to assume a pseudonym. He called himself F. Tomlin for the purposes of the play. One of the reasons he did this is not to be seen to be parodying his own play, and sort of doing down his own material. But I have to say that a big factor must have been that it was bound to be a very controversial thing, because at this time the Lord Chamberlain had to approve all plays before they could be performed.
The government censor.
Yeah, the government censor. And one of the criteria for acceptance was that it wasn't to be a direct political satire, and you certainly were not allowed to portray living and working politicians on stage, which is exactly what this play did.
Now, but did it do it through the text, or did it do it through makeup and things like that? I mean, stagecraft can make things more than is in the text.
The copy is the play itself, as submitted to the Lord Chamberlain, had quite general satire, and the three characters were not identified as Gladstone, Lowe, and Ayrton. By the time it reached the stage,
I think a bit of both is the answer, isn't it?
Yes,
there
it's
was
a bit of both.
There was more dodgy text, and I think the makeup completed the job pretty.
That's
pretty,
a very fair assessment. Yes, and as I explained in a sister podcast, on the first night, by pure mischance, the Prince of Wales decided to attend that particular theatre, the Court Theatre, and he took the royal box, and he was in the very awkward position of
Seeing his mother's government pillory it?
yes, yes, and he tried not to show that he was enjoying the play, but certain accounts show that his laughter was observed, and afterwards. Afterwards, the Prince of Wales was bloody furious.
As he was officially required to be.
Yes. And his secretary sent a very strongly worded letter to the Lord Chamberlain expressing this opinion. And the Lord Chamberlain said, "Oh dear," attended the play, said, "Oh dear" again, and banned the play from being performed again. And until it was resubmitted to the Lord Chamberlain's...
But this erupts in the press, doesn't it?
Oh yes, oh yes.
Lovely bit of advertising.
Yes. Big debate in the press for a few days about stage censorship. The particular point being that this kind of satire is being printed every week in Punch, so why can't it be performed on stage?
And that's presumably a view to which Gilbert held.
Well, yes. So there was a thing about no right to reply.
Yes.
But then he said, but Gladstone could go to the theatre and hiss.
Absolutely.
So every night.
Yeah.
I'm sure he'd have enjoyed it.
I beg your pardon. This was
sorry.
this was a letter to the Daily Telegraph. It was not by W.S. Gilbert. It was by F. Tomlin.
Sorry.
A fine distinction.
Of course. Yes.
Well, come over here where W.S. Gilbert can't hear us.
Yes. Yes, but a very funny and very sarcastic letter.
And then he mentions we get to the Lord High Disinfectants, which
Indeed,
is a
we
later
do.
response, isn't
Yes,
it?
yes.
I mean, he's laying his views on censorship publicly again.
Yes. F. Latour Tomlin decides to adapt a French farce and called Le Roi Condole, or something like that.
Yes. After the French, yes.
After the French, very much after the French. It was described as a free and easy adaptation of this play, and he called it The Realm of Joy. And in this the original French play was set in a theatre during the performance of a morally risky play, and the idea is that all the audiences are flocking to see this play in order to be outraged. So Gilbert, beg pardon, Mr. Tomlin decides to adapt this play, and this takes place in a theatre during the performance of a play called The Realm of Joy, which is a political satire on the government of the day.
And The Realm of Joy and the Happy Land have obviously got no connection in title whatsoever.
Of course,
no,
of course.
I can see nothing.
And there's a recurring joke about the Lord High Disinfectant, who is the stage censor, and everyone has the highest respect for this functionary. And the only reason anyone comes to see this play is because they want to be outraged at these people who are defying the Lord High Disinfectant. And of course, this adapted play called The Realm of Joy has to be sent to the Lord Chamberlain's department in order to be approved.
This is in real life, of course.
This is in real life, yes. And the reader of plays there, he fires off this letter to one of his colleagues, Lord Ponsonby, I believe it was, saying essentially, I am outraged. How can I possibly pass this piece, which is obviously intended to be a personal insult to the Lord Chamberlain? But by this point, the Lord Chamberlain has learnt his lesson from the Happy Land, and he's obviously thinking to himself, let's not cause ourselves more bother, more trouble for ourselves than we need. And so he says,
you make things worse by banning, when
exactly.
In fact, if you just trim, you can keep it in control,
yes,
presumably.
Yes, so he replies saying, please pass this play with the usual corrections.
Which doesn't get a very good response.
No, the reader says, what the usual corrections can possibly be in this,
Yes.
I can't imagine.
Right, yes.
But he grits his teeth and does it.
But once again, this is Gilbert pushing at the edges of
Yes.
everything to do with the stage, including
Yes.
the control and censorship of
Yes.
it, isn't it? He's constantly pushing to be the chief controller
Yes.
of everything to do
Oh,
with
yes.
his work,
Oh, yes.
including external forces.
Yes.
So we're now travelling through we're in the 1870s.
Yes.
And this is the time that, after a few unhappy arrangements outside what D'Oyly Cart's arranged, the Opera Comique, basically.
Yeah.
When that all falls horribly at the end of HMS Pinafore,
Yes.
and you've got D'Oyly Carte setting up a company with Sullivan and Gilbert, which then sort of, sorts out for the rest of the run.
Yes.
Gilbert is, I think it was described yesterday as Gilbert is in the middle of it, and an organisation is built around him, at least in relation to stagecraft and stage
Yes.
working, his stage management technique, shall we
Yes.
say.
Absolutely.
This is almost the culmination of his career, as it is professionally and creatively as well.
Yes.
Creatively.
This is this is something that I believe that came through to me very strongly while I was researching the book. I mean, obviously, people are open to. I'm very willing for people to disagree with this because this is my theory. But but yes, what comes through to me is that this is the point where Gilbert finally gets the control that he needs. He has a blank stage. He has control of the cast. He has control over set design, costumes, everything, and Gilbert is even able to say, "I need so many weeks rehearsal time before we're ready," and he gets it, and which is unprecedented, I believe, unless I'm told otherwise.
Which again possibly explains why his other output starts to dry up, because why does he need to go through that hassle of fighting anymore when at the Savoy it's all
laid out on
it's all out, exactly.
Yes.
It's sort of in the contract. He's got all that, and so all his previous struggles with actor managers or whatever. Because I mean, he wrote some of his earlier plays for actors, and there was a bit of tension sometimes over them saying, "Oh no, I don't think that's quite the right part for me." Was there not?
Yes.
So suddenly,
So we have this bizarre situation where he's reformed and created what we now think of as the modern concept of a playwright, in some senses. And he's reformed and created what we understand as a modern director.
And also, just to say, you could also say that the creation of the D'Oyly Carte Company means that he's able to start reforming the musical theatre in a way, in that just that if actors were regarded as pretty low, then chorus girls were regarded as beneath contempt, and anyone involved in musical theatre was
worse even than
other actors, and because he ran the Savoy with and treated the chorus with respect, to be honest, and demanded that other people treat them with respect when it came to gentlemen who would come to the operas and pass indecent notes to members of the chorus, and he would go and confront them and tell them what he thought of them. Even that is another reform. Exactly. It's another reform.
It also drives people away who will be sending those notes, which helps clean up the theatre.
Indeed, yes.
So, I mean, this is also about the time when palaces theatres becoming palaces of propriety. Are they not? I mean, I might slightly earlier, but this is part of that drive.
It is ironic that I suppose I hadn't thought about this before, that critics were saying, "Oh no, you can only present a very moral tone on the stage. Anything that sort of breaks that code is wrong and cannot be tolerated," while the actual people who performed them are regarded with contempt. Whereas as the respectability of the performers was raised, the what you could present on stage in terms of morality was gradually diminished in terms of the conduct of people. And heroes could argue with their fathers, and there wasn't an absolute rule that women with a shady past had to be punished anymore. That gradually came through in the 1880s and 1890s.
Which is exactly what we're saying about setting the foundation stones for people like Ibsen from abroad, Shaw in this country. Well, to a slightly lesser degree, I think. But it seems to me that the people we think of as late Victorian dramatists are all now making the use of the building blocks that Gilbert has, by dint of pure personality and a lot of shouting, managed to get in place.
Well, I think with Wilde, using that as an example, yes, you're right. He's not sort of primarily a playwright. He did plays as a bit of fun after he'd done various other things, and
they're a cash cow.
Almost
in the Sullivan sense,
I'll do it for the money.
I'm skint. I'll need to write another play.
And maybe Shaw, if he had this urge to say things, then maybe he would have burst through anyway. But I'm sure Wilde only wrote for the theatre because the theatre had been, in inverted commas, cleaned up. And I don't want to, but by cleaned up, I don't mean in terms of it was so respectable, because that sort of reinforces the popular image of Gilbert as being a fusty Victorian. But it had been cleaned up in terms of being a worthwhile place again to sort of to put on a thoughtful play. And so Gilbert did all the groundwork, and then Wilde sort of can just swan in and say, "Oh yes, I'll do my witty little comedy." You couldn't do a witty little comedy like The Importance of Being Earnest in the 1860s or 1870s. It just would have been impossible. No one would have even thought of doing it.
Yes.
So, well,
in the 1870s, Gilbert obviously.
Well, Gilbert did it, because he had the force.
Yes.
But Wilde couldn't be bothered with, fighting with actor managers to get his words heard.
Absolutely,
but
yeah.
Gilbert had done all that work, so that yes, actually, words. The author was a very important person in the theatre, and so then Wilde can swan in and say, "Well, here are my words.
Yes.
Please see them." And no one will sort of say, "Oh no, we want to adapt them," because the groundwork.
It's not quite as simple as that.
Well,
of course,
sorry,
with The Importance of Being Earnest, which Wilde's script was in 4 acts, and then the actor manager suddenly trims it to 3 acts.
Curses. Yes, that is true. But
yeah, broadly speaking, yes. I agree.
But Oscar Wilde does. I mean, we're forgetting one thing here, of course, is which it's often said that Gilbert is the first author to get his name on the credits. Partly, I mean, we know he's to this day he's Gilbert and Sullivan. We know Oscar Wilde. We know. I mean, these plays by these. They become names in their own rights, and therefore their plays are partly sold by the fact that they have an author who is X, Y, and Z. Gilbert's doing that quite early on, isn't he? By generating this reputation and puff of controversy or whatever it is. His name is never really out of the press from the moment he starts.
I suppose so. Yes. I'm thinking of sort of dramatists previous to Gilbert, people like Tom Taylor and Boucicault, who I'm sure had their followers as writers.
Would it have said the new Boucicault on the?
I might have done actually. In his case, he had quite because he was an actor as well, of course. So he was an actor, manager, writer, probably.
Another all-rounder, essentially.
Yes.
But it's the all-rounders who are able to then concentrate into one source of power. I think that everything comes back to this idea of, isn't it? Is that too broad a concept? Too broad an idea?
I'm not sure of the answer to that. I have to pass.
But I think bringing this discussion to an end, we've travelled through Gilbert's. I mean, there's a brief flurry of delight at the end of Gilbert and Sullivan's. He writes a few things on the side. They aren't huge successes.
Yes.
So he's concentrating on his Savoy operas. He then retires at the beginning of the 20th century after Fallen Fairies, is it?
Which was an adaptation of the
Wicked World.
Wicked World.
Yes.
I couldn't think of anything.
He announces to the press that he's not going to write any more plays in 1898 after a court case subsequent to his play The Fortune Hunter, which got disastrous reviews. He decides that the game isn't worth a candle. He doesn't need the money. He doesn't really need the hassle. So he writes 1 or 2 more plays after that. He writes The Fairy's Dilemma, which is one of Suzanne's favourite plays. He adapts Fallen Fairies from The Wicked World with music by
Edward
German.
But Edward German's last piece, isn't it? As well?
Edward German's last piece because
Never
of
again,
fracas. Exactly, basically.
Gilbert finished him off as well. So
Yes, he had a knack.
To be honest, I think, as far as I understand it, the relationship with German wasn't that bad. But
No, I think he had a good relationship, but I think
yes.
German just hated getting sucked into the whole argument that Gilbert was having with the manager of the theatre.
But anyway.
In the same way as Sullivan did previously, just everyone who ever worked with Gilbert, especially on the creative side, was sort of, why are you dragging me into these arguments you have with other people?
There's something in there.
Yes, right.
Never mind, skate over that.
Okay,
But yes, these sort of little pieces that he was writing, sort of from a personal point of view, they seem a little bit creatively dry. Yes. And Fairy's Dilemma has wonderful ideas, but I'm afraid the execution, from my point of view, Suzanne will disagree. But I think the execution is leaves much to be desired. The actual dialogue is very, very wordy, very long sentences, very long involved sentences, and I'm sorry.
Would you care to put in a word for Fairy's Dilemma?
Just briefly, why do you love it?
Because it brings together everything that Gilbert was interested in, like the pantomime is very strong in it, fairies, of course, who wouldn't love fairies, and you say it's difficult, it would be difficult to do, but I think you have things like Andrew Lloyd Webber doing all these fantastic things on stage, and I think you could do it. And you're saying the sentences are too long, but that's because actors, they want to do everything naturalistically, realistically, like you see on soap operas on television. They perhaps haven't got the training, but it could be done. You could train to do it. And I think it would be fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
So if an impresario is listening,
Absolutely. We want something new to do.
we'll get the Ohio Light Opera Society to do a version. But for all intents and purposes, he's stopped right up until this last sketch, The Hooligan, which once again sets the world aflame, and then he dies.
Yes.
Essentially.
Yes. Do you want to talk about the background to
just
the
briefly. It's a final flaring of the candle, really, isn't it?
I would agree. Yes. Oswald Stoll, the manager of the Coliseum Music Hall,
which is we now as the know as the ENO, the English National Opera. It's the biggest musical biggest theatre in London, I believe.
Probably.
I think it is. Yes.
Yeah.
It's a musical, ladies and gentlemen.
It certainly is massive.
He wants to make music hall more respectable. The key word of the Victorian era. Bring in a better class of audience and so on. So
Well, there'd also been that gulf, hadn't there, between music halls and theatre. That music halls weren't covered by the Lord Chamberlain, and they weren't allowed to put on plays of any sort. There was a very strict delineation between the two, which was starting to break down. Through an act, was it an act or something that was enabled that they could put on short sketches up to half an hour? Was it?
I think so.
Short plays up to half an hour.
Yes.
As part of their bill, and still be exempt from the Lord Chamberlain, I believe.
So
that goes hand in hand with that respectability.
So he's looking for writers who are prepared to write short dramatic sketches fitting this remit, in order to bring in a better class of person who is going to say, "Oh, a play by Bernard Shaw," etc. So they approach Bernard Shaw, and Bernard Shaw
gives a Shavian response.
Gives a Shavian response, saying something like it's like asking a tailor to produce a waistcoat and nothing else, And it's okay, very clever, Shaw. I'll go away now, And they also approach Gilbert.
Did they approach him as a bit of a last resort, or was he second on their list after Shaw?
He was possibly about second or third, I think.
Oh, right, so not too bad.
From memory, I think J.M. Barrie was also approached.
Right.
I think he may have said yes, but I'm not sure about that. Anyway,
but he's still a name.
Yeah,
he's still definitely a name, even though he's fallen massively out of favour.
Yeah, he's kind of he's viewed as a sort of a relic of a bygone age,
and maybe someone who's willing to trot out some.
Yes,
but it's still a name, and that's the point.
Absolutely,
To use the horrible modern phrase, bums on seats, I suppose.
Absolutely. And so Gilbert says, "Oh, that's an interesting idea. I've got this idea involving an actor, James Welsh, who's, as far as I can understand, kind of straddled music hall and the stage. He had a foot in either camp, and so Gilbert specifically is interested in writing a tragedy for James Welsh, who was particularly known for comic pieces. And he comes up with this little sketch portraying a condemned man on the last morning of his life just before execution. His nightmares, his traumas, his panic attacks, and his attempts at justifying his own conduct because he is a pretty nasty piece of work.
But it portrays him as human, and not
As human,
and not
yes.
as a grotesque or a caricature.
Indeed.
Well,
yes.
he's weak, yes, and
He's
yes,
weak.
he's been everything he's done is because he's weak and stupid, and he's sort of not inherently evil.
Yes.
He doesn't really recognise the difference between right and wrong,
Yes.
but that's kind of portrayed as because he's weak-willed and easily led and uneducated and this, that, and the other. So yes, he's very human.
So it's not just black and white. There's plenty of shading.
Yes.
So it's one of his social commentary pieces in a way.
Absolutely, yes. And it gets... I don't know how to describe the reaction, but it's kind of uproarious, and it divides the house. He gets cheers and sort of...
That does seem like old times.
Absolutely.
Shock and awe. Shock and awe.
Exactly,
Shock and awe.
Yeah.
and you get outrage and this conflict of reaction between people being carried away and sort of the emotional response, this kind of elemental emotional response which Gilbert plays don't usually get.
No.
and it's too much for some people. Sort of people are carried out fainting. People storm out in the middle. They can't take it anymore, and people say it shouldn't be allowed. And it's I just my admiration for Gilbert just is just
He can still pull it out of the bag.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Because we were talking about this yesterday after the talk, and
Yes.
you were saying that it influenced somebody in the 20s or 30s, 1920s or 30s. Is it Flannery or you said a writer?
What I said was that. Sorry, I'm sorry.
What I said was
Actually,
no, but I thought it was really interesting.
no. One of the critics, one of the favourable critical reactions was talked about how Gilbert was taking the new drama people on at their own game and beating them at it. Saying John Goldsworthy in particular, he was taking that kind of social piece to its extreme
and was saying that with great surprise, wasn't it? So it was
Yes.
saying Gilbert of all people,
indeed.
kind of saying this fossil. So although he was still a bum on a seat, he was
From a previous time.
from a previous time, yeah.
Yes.
So there was great sort of surprise and admiration, I think, from that
Indeed,
critic, but
absolutely,
primarily
yes.
surprise.
Yes, and
Really was
there was another reaction. It was from a critic who evidently disliked the whole idea of this piece being done at all, but even he had to acknowledge that it was brilliantly written, that it was powerful, and so on. And he just ends the review saying, if it has to be done at all, this, etc., and their criticism must leave it. Which I think is marvellous.
Again.
But you also said last night.
Oh, what did I say last night? I can't
Because
remember
we were talking
this.
about this. That was just really interesting. You said there was somebody writing novels in the 30s.
Oh, I remember now. Yes.
Good.
Yes.
You were right.
Ah, yes. Dawnford Yates.
That's it. Yes.
Berry and Co.
Dawnford Yates, the appalling Tory MP.
Probably.
The hang 'em and flog 'em fella.
I know him as.
I mean, he had that. Dawnford Yates is his
This is probably
pseudonym.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. This is probably true. I don't know, but it's probably true. He, a novelist of the flapper era, sort of, sort of
John
writing
Hannay kind of
things.
stuff, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, I'm told he was a horrible man who wrote very good books.
Yeah, I went through a Dawnford Yates period in my teens. I don't think I'd go back to them. But in the 50s, he writes this this book of essentially of reminiscences, slightly fictionalized reminiscences, and they reference the hooligan, and suddenly they talk about how powerful this piece was, and they talk about the original production, which obviously Yates must have seen, and
So even 40 years afterwards, there's some
yes,
resonance.
Absolutely, this is something that's stuck in Yates's mind, and as a distinctive and
Striking piece.
yes.
So that brings us back to our original question. Is Gilbert a great dramatist, is he? Well, the question was, we don't think that he's the greatest Victorian dramatist, but we think he is the most influential, or the Victorian dramatist, or most important Victorian dramatist.
I would say that gets a vote for me, because I think that he did lay a lot of important foundation stones, and also his plays were fantastically popular at the time. And the thing was, he was very innovative in many respects, but in some respects, such as his dogged devotion to blank verse, and the fact that you can see it in the Savoy operas, his dialogue isn't naturalistic. It never is. It's always a bit declamatory. You get people saying something which is a statement, not completely Brechtian, sort of going out to the front of the audience and saying, "This is my point of view," but it's not sort of naturalistic dialogue, and in many respects, jolly good for that, But and when you've got short bursts of dialogue in an operetta, that's fine. But when you've got a whole play made up of it, modern ears just can't cope with it, really, and it is quite tiresome in some cases. And I was going to say, you said earlier in a sister podcast that you thought there were 8 to 10 of his plays that sort of were still. I don't know whether worth sort of doing or at least worth reading.
Worth doing.
Worth doing.
Yes, absolutely.
Would you like to name them?
Oh God!
At least a couple of them.
A couple of them. Engaged.
Engaged, top of the list, of course. Do I need to talk? Describe them?
Just a couple of sentences. Just why you think they're still relevant and good.
Engaged in particular is a kind of a bomb thrown into the Victorian drama. It explodes the conventions. And in particular, it grabs hold with deep talons at the Victorians' issues of respectability and politeness and conventionality, conventional behaviour.
It's a deconstructionist piece for Victorian morality, is that what we're saying?
Yes. Go on, let's say it.
It is exceptionally cynical.
Yes.
Yes.
The basis of everyone's behaviour is absolute selfishness and absolute cupidity, and they will do anything for money.
Well put.
Well, that sounds very modern, though.
Yeah.
Yes, remarkably so.
Yes. Other pieces. Tom Cobb, which is just incredibly funny. Fogarty's Fairy, which I would also put in the very funny category.
Which was sort of regarded as too clever by half by critics. For some audiences it was too much, or critics felt that audiences were being expected to keep on top of too many levels of reality at once.
Extraordinary review in the era in which the critic says Mr. Gilbert has taken us into a strange ocean in which essentially we've lost sight of land, we don't know where we're going, I'm completely confused. You read it today and you think, how can they have this reaction? It's a little bit, it's inventive, but there's nothing bizarre and nothing outrageous about it, but contemporary audiences didn't want to be stretched.
No. Well, they certainly weren't used to being stretched.
Yes. So, and it lasted 3 weeks.
So, they probably didn't want to be either.
Until it was revived in 2011.
And I have some others on the list which might be more contentious, like I would love to see Charity. I think Charity is a great piece. Last act gets quite melodramatic, but
it almost deserves to be. This is where it gets sort of mixed for me, because regardless of its merits, it deserves to be heard, just to say to people, look, this is what someone was putting out in the early 1870s.
1874,
1874. So much for Victorian theatre being pat. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And then I'd also get onto the musical pieces like Sensation Novel, like Ages Ago, and so on.
Pygmalion and Galatea at all, or is that a bit more mixed?
Or has it been superseded by Shaw?
I'm not sure.
Well,
it's a completely different category.
indeed,
from Shaw, isn't it?
This is almost again. I'm sorry. This is another minor rant by me, which is just that I went to see the Pygmalion last year at the Old Vic, just down the road, and they had a sort of piece about Pygmalion and the Pygmalion myth, and about what it all meant, and about how Shaw would know that people by calling it Pygmalion, people would know what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And I thought, you haven't even mentioned Gilbert's version, which must have kept it, because it was revived a lot, wasn't it? It was probably his most popular play, almost.
Yes,
most popular
his most popular
non-musical
play. Yeah.
And so that would have kept the name. I mean, yes, people were more knowledgeable about classical myth anyway in those days, but it would have been a very sort of popular play. People would have been very familiar with it. And here's Shaw doing a kind of modern day version of it. Wow. Yes. And I thought, not even to mention it. Come on, guys. At least put it into the historical context.
I have for me, the fairy comedies are. I can't get terribly enthusiastic about them, but it's this thing where where I honestly think you can't assess a play by reading it, even if you're sort of very experienced at it. And I'm sure there must be something that comes out in performance that you can't see in the text. And I would love to see something like Pygmalion and Galatea or The Palace of Truth done well on stage, so that I could actually decide for myself, so I can know. But that's more of an iffy.
One day, yes.
So my very last question then is: you've said there are these plays which could be revived. I just want to get us, I think, to a slightly more categorical statement. They could be. Should they be?
Yes.
That's a good answer. Well, in which case, I think I'll probably leave it there then, if I may. Thank you very much to you all. You've helped me with a really interesting debate about Gilbert's dramatic career and dramatic drive and dramatic architecture. I'd love to just carry this conversation on for hours, but what we have is great. But people can stay in touch with you, Andrew, can't they?
Yes.
I think through the W.S. Gilbert Society.
That's right. Yes, we have a website at wsgilbert.co.uk, and contact details may be found there.
And finally, I was going to say, Andrew, your book is now out. Just tell us the title of that again.
It's Gilbert of Gilbert and Sullivan. His life and character. I think I've got the subtitle correct then. Yes.
Marvellous.
Good.
Thank you very much, everybody, and I hope that W.S. Gilbert thinks we've done him proud.
I hope so too.
Musical talk. Well, there we are. My great thanks to Andrew Crowther, Suzanne Lubenko, and of course Jerry Pennell for talking about W.S. Gilbert as a director. And don't forget, if you want to go and see The Pirates of Penzance at the E&O, you can do so. It's been extended to the 4th of July. Go along to the website www.eno.org for more details. To me, it's absolutely heartening that a great piece of work, which is about 130 years old, is still being dusted down to delight audiences today. I think what this shows more than anything else is that the genre of musical theatre in its widest form, whether that's comic opera or musical theatre as we know it, or operetta for that matter, is as important to our cultural history as opera, painting and music. Well, that's quite enough portentousness from me, I think, and I'm sure you'll agree. And if you think that I meander and lose my way when I'm recording these links, which top and tail these episodes of Musical Talk, you can understand that I'm doing it in homage to the Pirates of Penzance, because I am just a poor wandering one. That's a very funny joke, and if you don't get it, do some research. You'll love it. So, for now, goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2015. And don't forget to follow us on our various social networks. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you could do so at Musical Talk Thos.